Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into a hidden power source that's humming away inside you at this very moment. It's not in your muscles, not even just in your brain. It's inside every single one of your trillions of cells. We're about to uncover the invisible electrical charge that literally makes life possible. So, what is this power source? Well, it's not a tiny battery like you might think. It's actually way cooler than that. It's an invisible, carefully maintained electrical potential that fuels everything from a neuron firing in your brain to the beat of your heart. So let's break down how your body actually builds this charge from scratch. Okay, it all starts right here with a barrier. You see, every single cell in your body is wrapped in this membrane, which separates the super-controlled world inside the cell from the kind of chaotic world outside. And this razor-thin barrier, well, this is the stage where an incredible electrical balancing act takes place. And here is that balancing act in real time. The cell isn't just letting things float around randomly. No, it creates a very deliberate imbalance. It works hard to pump ions like sodium out, while it stockpiles potassium and these other big negatively charged particles, we just call them anions, on the inside. This separation of positive and negative charge, that's it. That is the fundamental source of the cell's power. So you've got to be asking, how in the world does the cell keep this imbalance going? I mean, shouldn't everything just even out? Well, it would, except the cell has this remarkable little piece of molecular machinery, a tireless engine that's working constantly in the background to maintain the separation.
So, let me introduce you to the sodium-potassium pump. Think of it like a tiny molecular bouncer at the club door of your cell. It uses the cell's energy currency, a molecule called ATP, to power its work. And for every 2 positive potassium ions it lets in, it grabs 3 positive sodium ions and physically throws them out. And it never, ever stops. This constant 3 out, 2 in exchange is what creates that powerful imbalance we keep talking about.
To really get how this all generates a negative charge, we're going to zoom way in. We're going to follow the journey of just one key player in this whole drama, the potassium ion. So thanks to that tireless pump, the inside of the cell is absolutely jam-packed with potassium. We're talking something like 30 times more concentrated inside than outside. Now, if you've got a room that crowded, what does everyone want to do? They want to leave. And that creates this incredibly powerful pressure for potassium to get out of the cell. Now, that pressure we just mentioned, it has a scientific name, the concentration gradient. It's really just the natural tendency for stuff to spread out, to move from a place where it's crowded to a place where there's more room. And to allow this to happen, the cell membrane has these special little escape hatches, or leak channels, that are pretty much always open. But, and this is key, they only let potassium through. So what happens? Potassium starts to leak out, following that concentration gradient, escaping the crowded interior. But here's the catch. Every single time a positive potassium ion leaves, it leaves behind one of those big negative anions that can't get out. And so, slowly but surely, with every ion that escapes, the inside of the cell starts to build up a net negative charge. But this growing negativity inside the cell creates a brand new force. You know how opposites attract, right? Well, that negative charge inside the cell starts to act like a magnet, pulling those positive potassium ions that just left right back in. We call this force the electrostatic gradient. So this is the crucial point right here. Every single potassium ion is caught in an epic tug of war. The concentration gradient is relentlessly pushing it out of the cell, while this new growing electrical gradient is trying with all its might to pull it back in. Eventually, this tug of war reaches a perfect stalemate. It gets to a point where the force pushing potassium out is perfectly, exactly balanced by the electrical force pulling it back in. At this point, there's no net movement. This perfect balance point has a name. It's called the equilibrium potential. And for potassium, that magic number, that perfect balance point, is reached when the inside of the cell has an electrical charge of negative 92 millivolts. That is the exact voltage needed to perfectly counteract potassium's powerful desire to leave the cell. All right, so we've figured out potassium's deal. But here's the thing. While potassium might be the main character in this story, it is not the only actor on the stage. You've got sodium, chloride, and calcium all hanging around, and they each want something totally different.
And this chart, this reveals the central conflict of our story. Look at this. Each one of these ions has its own concentration gradient, which means each one has its own ideal voltage, the charge it's trying to pull the cell towards. And they are worlds apart. Potassium is pulling with all its might to get the cell to a very negative 92 millivolts. But look at sodium. It's pulling just as hard in the complete opposite direction, trying to make the cell a very positive plus 67.
So this brings up a huge question, right? If every ion is fighting to pull the voltage in a different direction, how does the cell ever decide on one single final resting charge? Who wins this electrical argument? Well, the answer is fascinating. It's not about which ion pulls the hardest, it's about which ion has the easiest time getting through the door. The cell's final voltage is basically a weighted average, and that weight is determined by something called permeability, which is just a fancy word for how easily each ion can get across the membrane. The ion with the most open channels gets the most votes. And this chart, this says it all. When a cell is just chilling out at rest, its membrane is overwhelmingly permeable to potassium. Remember those leak channels we talked about? They mean that about 90% of all the traffic across the membrane is just potassium ions. For everyone else, the door is basically shut.
So because potassium has 90% of the votes, it gets to drag the cell's overall voltage very, very close to its own ideal happy place of negative 92 millivolts. It's not even a competition. Potassium is completely running the show.
So the way to think about it is like this. You start with potassium's huge influence, which accounts for 90% of the final outcome. Then you get a little bit of a nudge from chloride. And finally, you get these tiny, almost insignificant whispers from sodium and calcium who can barely get their voices heard. And when you add it all up, when the dust settles, you'll land right here. The final resting membrane potential of a typical cell is about negative 86 millivolts. It's not exactly potassium's negative 92, right? And that's because those other ions managed to pull it up just a tiny bit. This is the cell's baseline. This is its ready state, charged up and just waiting for a signal. And this leads us to the most exciting question of all. This resting state is the foundation, but the real magic, the action, begins when a cell, like a neuron about to fire, suddenly decides to change the rules. What happens when it throws open a brand new set of doors and dramatically changes its permeability, all of a sudden listening to a different ion? Well, that rapid shift, that is the secret behind every single thought, feeling, and action you will ever have.